Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse, and this week with Rabbi Mintz we ask, was it the binding of Isaac or the sacrifice of Isaac? And what difference does it make? We use the seminal story of the miraculous birth of Isaac and the hints at the sacrifice and resurrection of Isaac in the biblical and later rabbinic texts to explore the meaning of these themes in Judaism and Christianity. This is also the last time we record our clubhouse on Friday afternoon due to the early onset of Shabbat and popular demand. We are moving our weekly clubhouse to 8 p.m. Thursday night. So reset your calendars, get out of your easy chair, say Hineni, and join us as we listen to the miraculous birth and resurrection of Isaac. Welcome to Madlik Disruptive Torah. I should say we've been doing this every week at 4 o'clock Eastern on Friday, but because the nights are coming sooner, we are going to move to 8 p.m. on Thursday. And I hope that all agrees with you, but if it doesn't fit into your schedule, do remember, I'm going to try to publish the podcast now on Friday, so you will have it before Shabbat. So what we mean by disruptive Torah is that we hopefully look at the ancient texts through new lenses, new angles, and share those insights with you and invite you to introduce your own, but hopefully walk away thinking about these texts a little bit differently. Sometimes it's a little unsettling, but that's all good because it means that the ancient texts remain live and vibrant with us. And today, my friends, is no exception. We are in Vayera. It is, I believe, the fourth portion that we've read in the book of Genesis. And it contains some really repetitive themes that we'll touch upon. And one theme that maybe it's unique and maybe it's not. And that's one of the things that we're going to discuss. And the repetitive theme is a miraculous birth. A barren mother, maybe in today's portion, because we're talking about Abraham and Sarah. Maybe even an impotent father. We don't know. He was 100 years old. And a miraculous birth of a child. And that is a theme that actually does appear over and over and over again, and we're going to get to that. But there's another, I won't call it a theme because it might be a theme, but it also might be a unique incident, and that is what is called by the Jews typically the binding of Isaac, and what is many times called by Christians the sacrifice of Isaac. And we will actually get into the question of, is it the sacrifice or is it the binding of Isaac, and does it make a difference? But in any case, let's start with the biblical account in Genesis 22. And it says, "And it was after these things that God put Abraham to the test. He said to him, Abraham, and he answered, Hineni, here I am. And he said, take your son, your favored one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Lech lecha el eretz ha-Moriah. And offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So early the next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. And on the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass, and the boy and I will go up there. We will worship, and we will return to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. And we're going to look a little bit further into the story. I don't think I need to read it all at this point because so many of you know this iconic story and possibly are troubled by him. But as you know, Abraham and Isaac walk silently up to the mountain together. At a certain point, Isaac says to Abraham, "Hey, Dad, I don't see that you have a lamb with you." And Abraham says enigmatically, "God will provide the lamb." And then he binds Isaac and has the knife raised above his throat, if you will, and an angel calls down from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, don't touch the boy." And that is the story. So the question that I pose to all of you, and you're all welcome to raise a hand and come up and discuss. I'm sure we all have opinions. But first to you, Rabbi, is this a unique incident, or is this part of a theme? This sense of sacrificing your child, certainly if you take it literally, Judaism is against, and the Bible is against, child sacrifice. Malach is famous for that. But whether in the literal sense or in a larger sense, this sense of giving up to prove one's faith or to prove something, is this unique or is this part of a general theme that I'm missing?
Good question. I mean, obviously, this is the most important question in the entire Bible. So the answer is it's a unique story. And let me just back up a minute. You started by saying, Geoffrey, that there's a difference between the way the Jews refer to it and the way the Christians refer to it. The Christians refer to it as the sacrifice of Isaac. The Jews refer to it as the binding of Isaac. The binding of Isaac is actually the translation of the biblical word akedah, which is the word that we find in the Torah. La'akod means to bind. Now, the first amazing thing, Geoffrey, is that word to bind, la'akod, is a unique word in the Torah. It only appears once in this context. So even in terms of the word, we know that this is an exceptional story. And the story is exceptional. There's no other story like it. The question, of course, is, what's the lesson of the story? And again, we invite everybody, just to raise your hand and we'll bring you up so you can share. So, very famously, there was a Danish philosopher by the name of Søren Kierkegaard. Most people don't know Søren Kierkegaard except for his view about the Akedah. He says that the story of the Akedah is that God asked Abraham to sublimate the ethical, which means to squash his ethical behavior of treating his son well for the sake of listening to God. Recently, there was a book written by a professor at Yeshiva University by the name of Aaron Kohler. And Aaron Kohler took issue with Kierkegaard. He said, "You're right. That's what God says to Abraham. Sublimate your ethical to listen to me." But then the angel comes, and the angel says, "Don't kill him." And what Professor Kohler says is that the lesson that the angel is trying to teach Abraham is that no, the ethical is the most important. What's most important is how you treat your children, even at the expense of listening to God. And that's the lesson we should walk away with. I think that's an amazing dispute. Is the lesson of this story that we need to listen to God above all else, even if he tells us to do something unethical? Or no, is the punchline of the story that the ethical is the most important?
I think that's a great insight. And of course, part of your resolution of the problem is how it ends. In other words, the story or your explanation or that of the rabbi would be different if, in fact, Isaac was sacrificed. But as you say, the punchline is that he wasn't sacrificed, and that teaches us something. And that teaches us that the ethical is more important. But I want to pick up on Kierkegaard because Kierkegaard also, he believed that this was a test of faith. But the faith that Kierkegaard says, he introduces another aspect which is fascinating. And that is that the faith that God was testing in Abraham was, do you believe when I told you that your children would be, you would have children, and that they would be like the stars of the heaven and the sands and all that? Do you believe that I will be able to fulfill that promise? And because Kierkegaard was Christian, obviously, the way he tweaked that slightly was, do you believe that even if I kill Isaac, I will resurrect him and you will still have him? Do you believe that I am capable of asking you to, in a sense, physically end my prophecy, and that I can still fulfill my prophecy? And I want to quote a verse that actually supports Kierkegaard a little bit. And this is Genesis 22. I read it during the introduction. And if you recall, it says, then Abraham said to his servants, you stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship, and we will return to you. We will return to you. So what the commentary would say, that Abraham was a man of faith. He knew that God was asking him to sacrifice his son, but somehow he knew in his heart of hearts either that there was going to be an angel at the last moment, the Deus Ex Machina, or that even if he killed him, he somehow would rebirth Isaac and give it back to him. If you look at Rashi on that verse, Rashi says he prophesies that they would both return. So he understands the intent of this verse, and Rashi's explanation is, in the middle of being tested, he also knew that somehow it was going to work out. In a sense, you could say that Rashi and Kierkegaard are on the same page. Another, Rabbeinu Bachia, says, and we will return to you. At that time, Abraham intended to bring back Isaac's bones for burial. And this is why he said, we will come back. I mean, the commentaries are very sensitive to this. You could also say clearly that he was fooling them, because he didn't, as we discussed last week, he figured if he told these guys he was going up to kill his son, they might stop him. But this notion that, in fact, number one, that the challenge here, and I think Rabbi Avram Bronstein mentioned it last week. Was this an ethical question that was confronting Abraham in the Akedah? Was it the emotional question of losing his son? You certainly don't feel that in the text. There's no angst here. Or was it this question of God promised he was going to give me progeny. Now he's asking me to destroy the possibility of that promise. Do I still believe in the promise?
Yes, I think there's so much there to build on. Let's talk about Rashi for a minute. I'm just trying to parse all the different things you talked about. Let's talk about Rashi. You think that Rashi that Kierkegaard and Rashi are saying the same thing? That what Rashi's saying is that God asks Abraham to do it even though it's unethical? You think Rashi's sensitive to that? That's interesting.
I'm not sure that part of it. What I was picking up as another part of Kierkegaard that I discovered, that Kierkegaard identifies the question of faith. And the question of faith has to do with this promise of future generations. And what Rashi is ultimately saying, and what Kierkegaard was saying, is that was the faith part that was being questioned.
Oh, okay.
And that so what Rashi is saying...
Good, I like that.
What Rashi is saying is that this man who is now being tested for his faith prophesies is that everything's going to work its way out. that he prophesies that even if he listened to God somehow, and you can conjecture that it was because there was going to be an angel to stop it, or there was going to be something else, that a resurrection. And I'm going to read a text now about the resurrection, because that is the critical difference, I believe, between the term the sacrifice of Isaac and the binding of Isaac. So listen to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Jehuda said, "When the blade touched his neck, the soul of Isaac fled and departed. But when he heard his voice from between the two cheruvim, the two angels, saying to Abraham, 'Lay not thine hand upon the lad,' his soul returned to his body, and Abraham set him free, and Isaac stood upon his feet. And Isaac knew that in this manner the dead in the future will be quickened. He opened his mouth, he said, 'Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, Mechaye HaMetim, who brings back the dead.'" So here is a source that looks at this as part of a bigger theme. And the theme is that God who gives life, God is capable of re-giving life. And this kind of concept of resurrection of the dead finds its first instance in the story of the sacrifice of Isaac.
Good. I mean, that Midrash is playing with an idea that Abraham actually killed Isaac, and that Isaac was brought back to life. I didn't know that Midrash, thank you, Geoffrey, because it says it pretty explicitly. I will tell you that the tradition in Judaism, not in Christianity, in Judaism, the place where that tradition really evolves, that Abraham killed Isaac and then he came back to life, was actually something the Jews in Germany and France during the Crusades, when Jews were given the choice whether to die or to convert to Christianity, and they chose death over conversion to Christianity. There were some people who saw that decision of death rather than conversion to Christianity as an experience of the Akedah. And there's a professor in JTS by the name of Shalom Spiegel who wrote an entire book called The Last Trial, in which he collects all of the sources that suggest that Abraham actually killed Isaac. I didn't know that Medrash, but that Medrash says it so explicitly. Baruch atah Hashem b'chayei hametim, that Isaac is brought back to life. My problem, Geoffrey, with that Medrash is that it's not explicit in the text. The text doesn't seem to say that Abraham killed Isaac. Mechayei hametim doesn't seem to be in the spirit of the text. I'll tell you another text. On Rosh Hashanah, in the Musaf prayer, we also talk about the binding of Isaac. And there we say to God, God, have compassion upon us, the same way that Abraham was willing to give up everything in order to listen to you, to sacrifice his son. As a reward for that, may you, God, have compassion upon us. And that's an interesting idea. That's an idea that what we say to God is, just like Abraham, again, sublimated the ethical. He was willing to kill his son because you said it. You should sublimate your desire to punish the people and be nice to us. But even that midrash, even that quote from the prayers, doesn't suggest that Abraham actually killed Isaac. That's in the preliminary part of the story, that Abraham was willing to do it, not that he actually did it. And I think that's an important point that Professor Kohler makes, and that is we need to distinguish between what the beginning of the story says and what the punchline says.
So I just want to comment on Professor Spiegel, but also the fact that we are living right now in a golden age of Christian Jewish studies. And by that I mean that the ideas were many times that Christianity took ideas from Judaism. But now scholars like Daniel Boyarin and Jon Levenson and others are saying, yes, but this gives us license to look into Christianity, and through looking at Christianity, possibly understand some of our texts and traditions. And this is based on the assumption that Christianity was trying to convince the Jewish people to accept this new Messiah. And they argued from existing traditions. Making something up would not have gotten them very far. So scholars like Spiegel and Levenson are now looking through our texts, and they're coming up with amazing material. So for instance, we read in Genesis 22:6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. Here's what Bereshit Rabbah says. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering like one who carries his own slav, his own stake, on his shoulder. He literally says like carrying your own cross. So again, according to this way of looking at some of these texts, it's not as though when the New Testament described Jesus as carrying his old text, it might have been very conscious to, in a sense, type into and latch into these existing traditions. You mentioned the Musaf service of Rosh Hashanah. There's even a bigger parallel with Passover and the Paschal Lamb. With Rosh Hashanah, we have the ram's horn, and that's important. But with the Paschal Lamb, listen to what the Bible in Exodus 12 says. If you recall, the Jews are leaving Egypt. The firstborn sons are being killed. Everybody is an Abraham in Egypt killing their Isaac. And the blood on the houses where you shall be staying shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. The Mechilta de Rabbi Yishmael says, what is the intent of this? And I shall see the blood. I shall see the blood of the binding of Isaac. As it is written, and Abraham came to the place the Lord will see. Hashem Yira'eh. But he was about to destroy, the Lord said, and he repented himself of the evil. What did he see? He saw the blood of the binding of Isaac. So there are two issues that are fascinating here. One is that he makes the connection to a very powerful theme of the Paschal Lamb, to the sacrifice, I misspoke, to the binding of Isaac. And second, he talks about the blood of Isaac. So you can try to answer that, Rabbi, and say that maybe Isaac was nicked before the angel interrupted. But where does the blood of Isaac come from all of a sudden? And so you have in this week's portion, at the end it says, Abraham then returned to his servants and they departed for Beersheba. So the commentaries pick up on saying, why does it say Abraham then returned? Why doesn't it say Abraham and Isaac returned? So the Ibn Ezra says Isaac is not mentioned because he was under Abraham's care. Those who say that Abraham slaughtered Isaac and left him on the altar, and following this Isaac came to life, are contradicting Scripture. The point that I'm making is Ibn Ezra would not say this if there weren't people arguing the case. And you're right, it might have been Christians. But again, we're talking about levels of texture and tradition that are clearly part of this story in the classical rabbinic texts. They certainly become more profound as history goes forward. This Levenson talks about the Maccabees were the first to really begin this concept of the Techiyat HaMetim, the revival, the resurrection of the dead in Judaism. And if you read the book of the Maccabees time and time again, when they're sacrificing themselves to the Greeks, rather than break the law, they reference Akedat Yitzchak. So there is something there, and that's why I raised my original question: is it the binding of Isaac, or was it the actual sacrifice of Isaac, and does it make a difference?
So I think all those points are amazing points. I mean, and that just you took us on a journey through rabbinic literature. And the answer to your question, Geoffrey, is yes, it makes a difference. The sacrifice of Isaac is one thing. The blood of Isaac is part of the sacrifice of Isaac. The binding of Isaac suggests that there was a binding, but they didn't actually kill him. But Michael is up here. So Michael, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Geoffrey. I understand that sacrifice is giving up something for the sake of something else, or giving up something you want to keep. They say no sacrifice is too great when it comes to children. So binding is for me like a straitjacket, and sacrificing is giving up something. And when it comes to children, I think in this golden age, there is a liberation from old belief systems, from the shoulds and shouldn'ts. And the young generation today, and every young generation, questions the traditions and the ways of the forefathers. And so a father has to, as I understand fatherhood, bless his children and sacrifice his own my children. I don't like that, my children. I understand that children are there to raise as best you can, and then send them off and bless them and be wind under their wings. And then there is the prophecy of return, when you do come home alone, like Abraham came home alone. But he, like parents, go home alone, empty nesting. And then maybe, and I bet, the children come home, and they come home with their own stories and their own new traditions and their own new ways that they fought hard to birth.
Wow.
So that's what I see in this.
Thank you, Michael.
Beautiful, Michael. Thank you so much. I mean, I think that's a whole different way of looking at children, and I think that is something that if you bring that out from this story, I think that's beautiful.
So the question is, what now becomes the takeaway? One of the scholars who I've read, who's fascinating here, is he talks about this break of natural birth, meaning to say, and I started by talking about this week's parsha. We have two themes. One is, we can now call it this potential sacrifice of Isaac and his rebirth, and the other is miraculous birth. And he says what they all, and by miraculous birth, I should say that every parent group from Abraham forward, it didn't occur before as far as I could tell. Adam and Eve did not have a problem conceiving. But from Abraham and Sarah going forward, every patriarch is born, and great prophet, is born out of miraculous situations. And in fact, Abraham and Sarah had to even change their name. They were Abram and Sarai, and they had to change their name in order to give birth. Changing one's name is being reborn. Yes, in the Bible, it means being reborn, already in the Old Testament. And then they have, at 90 for Sarah and 100 for Abraham, they have this miraculous birth. And you can look at the language, which is fascinating. It says, and God visited Sarah, v'Hashem pokad et Sarah, like he said. Now, There's a great movie with Woody Allen, and it's called The Front. And he's being grilled to see if he knows any communists. And finally he says, "Do you mean in the biblical sense?" And of course what he's talking about is something called carnal knowledge, which is that the word know, Adam knew Eve, can mean carnal relations. Well, there's also something called a conjugal visit. And the word pakad is used mostly in Rabbinic Judaism, many times as a euphemism for a conjugal visit, meaning to say if someone is about to go on a trip, chayav adam lifgod et ishto lifnei nesiato. A man has to visit his wife before he leaves. So what I'm trying to get at is not to necessarily say we have a story of a virgin birth here, or the alternative, which is a barren mother past menopause and an impotent father in his hundreds have a baby. The point is that it's miraculous and that it is an absolute break with natural birth. And that's how I'm kind of taking your comment, Michael, which is that there is a big theme in Judaism that you need that break. Let's not forget that when Adam began his journey from Haran, it says, leave your father's house. You've got to leave your parents to find yourself. And according to that interpretation, that's what happens if Isaac gets sacrificed. He is being brought up to this mountain by a man newly reborn as Abraham, who was given a child, a miraculous child, and now he himself is having to go through this miraculous transformation of dying and being reborn. So you could argue that both themes that we're seeing here, Michael, are very along the lines that you're talking. That redemption, liberation, full actualization can only come when you break, possibly, and it doesn't have to be forever, it might be momentarily, the umbilical cord of natural birth.
And that is the pain in suffering, in sacrifice, and the pain in the binding, because wearing straitjackets, I can attest, is painful. So unbinding and sacrificing is painful in sacrifice, and releasing the pain in the unbinding.
That's nice. You're taking the other side, not the binding, Geoffrey, but the unbinding.
Yes, well, but that's what happens when you talk about the sacrifice of Isaac. You're ultimately talking about the resuscitation and rebirth as a new person. You know, the takeaways are kind of fascinating. And the takeaways make this less of a extraordinary incident and actually something, very a part of what Judaism turned out to be. This guy who I quote, he says that it doesn't stop here. He says if you think about all of the patriarchs, whether Isaac going to sleep and the angels coming down and going up, which could be a metaphor for dying and being reborn, whether it's fighting with the angel to the last moment. So there is, it seems to be, a very basic theme. But as we started, Rabbi, and you talked about the key is how the story ends, I do believe that if we benefit a little bit from reading the rabbinic texts through new lenses, with a little bit of help from the way Christianity took this motif, it does become something that becomes both thematically important, but also, in a sense, edifying, in the sense that we all need to be reborn, and the question is what we do with our life. And that, more to the point, that all of our births have to be miraculous, and that in a sense God is the third partner in our births, and that is something that is a very famous rabbinic text. So maybe that is a little bit of the takeaway of what otherwise can be a very challenging, depressing, and rattling story in the Bible.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. Amazing conversation today. We look forward. Enjoy your Shabbat, everybody. We look forward to seeing everybody this Thursday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and we will discuss the portion of Chayei. Geoffrey, have a great trip to Israel, and we will see you from Israel on Thursday night. Be well, everybody. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. And now for the after party. Those of you who want to stay up and talk like Michael Posnick, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's really remarkable conversation and really wide-ranging. I would like to go back to Kierkegaard for a minute. At the beginning of one of his chapters, he gives a metaphor. It says, when it's time for a mother to wean the child, that she puts ashes on her breast. And so he draws from that the child will turn away from the breast, but not from the mother. And he understands it, at least as my memory goes back to understand it, and this goes back very much to what Michael was pointing to, that the Akedah is in a way like the ashes on the breast, and it allows Isaac to have his own relationship with God and not be a possession or owned by his father. And the father has to let go, and the son has, as you said before, Geoffrey, the son has to stand on his own and deal with his own life, and not be in the shadow or the clutches or the binding of the parental bounds. I understand binding here also as meaning that it was an opportunity for Isaac to bind himself to God and release, or at least see that as a kind of a maturation away from being a child to becoming his own man. So I think that the Kierkegaard piece really fits into a great deal of what you've been saying and what Michael said as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, at the end of the day, when Abraham does come back alone, it's not, even if you believe that Isaac was sacrificed and then resuscitated, it doesn't mean that he was dead, but it does mean that he went his own way. He didn't come home with Dad. And then, of course, the next chapter, which we start next week, is that Sarah dies. And according to some of the scholars that I was talking about, it ultimately means that both Abraham and Sarah, at this point, were separated from their son. He was standing on his own 2 feet at this point. And that's as much a part of the story as anything else. Well, thank you so much.
In that sense, Geoffrey, what dies is an old Isaac, and the new one is allowed to breathe free.
Interesting that he's the only patriarch whose name is not changed. I just thought of that. So it was deep. It wasn't.
Something to laugh at.
It was not superficial. Yeah. You couldn't give up a name like Yitzchak, which means to laugh. That's right. For someone who went through the torment that he did, the irony does not escape any of us.
No.
Well, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Geoffrey.
Great.
Shabbat Shalom too. Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining.